Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this first annual Realtors Training Symposium. We're really happy to be with you all virtually this morning. We'd originally hoped to host this in person, but we're glad to be able to be here safely with you all virtually this morning. My name is Amy Sunny, and I'm the Director of Education here at the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach. And I really just want to welcome everybody and thank you for spending your morning with us. And I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping items and say a special thank you to the Palm Beach Board of Realtors. This training is being conducted in partnership with them, and we really appreciate their support. And also, I'd like to thank the Landmarks Preservation Commission for their enthusiastic support of this training symposium. There's been a lot of great discussion and a lot of discussions about what could go into these presentations to really help give the best training possible. So just a little bit of housekeeping this morning. All participants have been muted in order to reduce background noise for the presenters. Questions can be submitted via the Q&A feature, and we will definitely do the best that we can to get to your questions this morning. If you have any technical issues, please send a private message to Katie Jacob via the Zoom chat feature. And then following the symposium, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the recording and a survey for you to provide feedback. We're hoping to be able to host a similar training session to this again in the future, and so we really welcome your feedback. And last, I'd just like to thank you all for joining us. The work that you do is so crucial to maintaining the historic character of the town, and we're just really glad to have you all this morning. So a quick overview of our agenda. The first thing that we'll do this morning is a presentation from the town of Palm Beach. Then we'll have a presentation from the Preservation Foundation. We'll have a short break this morning. And then we will have a presentation at 11:15 called Property Values and Landmarking in Palm Beach by Donovan Ripkema of PlaceEconomics. And I would say that certainly you'll want to make sure that you stick around for the property values lecture. There's a lot of really great information in this report that was just completed by Donovan Ripkema that really relates to the work that you all do with assessing properties and buying and selling properties in Palm Beach. So with that, I would just like to welcome the town of Palm Beach staff, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here and turn it over to them so that they can introduce themselves and get started with their presentation. So thank you all.
Good morning, everyone. We are so thrilled to be here. Thank you, Amy. That was such a great introduction, and a special thanks to you and the Preservation Foundation for including the town on this symposium. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Pardue. I'm the Historic Preservation Planner here at the town. And with us today, we have Director Wayne Bergman and Assistant Director James Murphy, as well as my fellow planner, Jordan Hodges. Hi, I see them waving on here. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and walk you through some things that we would like to share with you. As I said, I'm Sarah Pardue. I am the Historic Preservation Planner with the town of Palm Beach. And today we're going to kind of work through the town's role in not just preservation, but really how our department works to ensure that we can maintain the architectural beauty and charm of Palm Beach, and also facilitate best practices in how we review development here on the island. I hope that you leave here with a better understanding of the hard work that we do here at the town, and know that we're really here to help you. We want to help realtors, homeowners, and developers in any way we can. And we have a strong staff here that's ready whenever you guys have questions or anything you want to discuss as far as development. And we hope you do reach out after today. Palm Beach is very unique in a lot of ways, but one thing that makes it stand out from a development perspective is that all exterior modifications to structures, that's both commercial, residential, historic, or non-historic, are reviewed at some level by town staff. And this is something that we really want homeowners to know and understand about their property, and it has been in practice on the island since the 1920s with the art jury. So this is longstanding. We also find that municipalities that have implemented a design review component to their development process have been shown to have more stable property values, higher public input, there's more participation in the development process, and a greater sense of place and community. The town of Palm Beach is unique in that the development history of how and why the island developed over 100 years ago, still impacts how we develop and plan today. So reviewing new development and alterations to historic buildings is really a safeguard to those historic development patterns and what makes Palm Beach, Palm Beach. So some requests that are given to us as staff to alter properties are handled at a staff level internally. However, the majority of those proposals are actually sent to a board for review. And here we have 3 different boards that review that. We have the Architectural Review Commission, which we refer to as ARCOM. We have Landmarks Preservation Commission, which we refer to as LPC, and Town Council. And those are the Architectural Review Commission and Landmarks. Those are members that are appointed by Town Council. However, Town Council is elected by the community. The members that are appointed to these boards range in a variety of disciplines in order to make sure we have a fair board, and it has people who have knowledge in architecture, real estate, architectural history, construction, law. And our focus today is going to be on landmarks, but I really wanted to take an opportunity to highlight the difference between the 2 design review boards that's often confused. And even though landmarks is very important and we're going to discuss it in depth today, the majority of projects here do go to ARCOM. So it's important to know that. Furthermore, we hope you as realtors understand that these design boards are very important in that anything that's going to permitting does need to come through a design review board first. And we want people to know that so they can take the next steps when trying to develop their properties. Earlier this year, our department made some big changes to the development process. And so we really highly suggest that after today, you visit our website and you see the app updated. We have updated applications, timelines, and a lot of information to help really inform you about the process that we've changed here. We want homeowners to have a full understanding of how the process works, any incentives that might appeal to them, and of course, timeline. So I'm going to walk through a few of those steps. The first one is a staff level application, which we discussed, I mentioned earlier. Staff level applications are for both ARCOM and landmarks. And examples of this would be like-for-like changes to windows, doors, roofing material, landscaping, and really any alterations that are happening that are not visible from the public right of way. Those are brought to us as staff, we review them internally, and they're not placed on a board agenda. Now, for any property that is landmarked or under consideration or historically significant, not only do we review it as staff, but our preservation consultants, Murphy Stillings, and an LPC board member also reviews the application, really just to make sure that it holds the standards that have already been set forth. And the next level is minor projects. I won't touch on this that much because really minor projects go to ARCOM only. And those are things that are a little bit bigger in scope. However, we feel that the board should review and not just staff alone. The biggest and the last one would be our major projects. Major projects for both landmarks and ARCOM are demolition, new construction, additions to your home or structure. And the timeline for a major project is something we also really hope that realtors and design professionals take the time to understand and convey to their clients. Detailed information, like I said, is available on our website, and we hope you visit it. But as you can see there at the bottom, there is a brief timeline here, and this process does take several months. So we really want you guys to be informed. Now, Town Council, ARCOM, and LPC all have different thresholds that determine what is a staff versus a board approval. And those are predetermined. We don't make, we run by a set of standards. However, with landmarks and preservation being discussed today, I want to highlight some of the program and the associated incentives. Since 1979, the town has continually supported every effort internally and from third-party organizations, specifically the Preservation Foundation, to further efforts to protect the architectural assets of the island. And most recently, in 2020, we had the completion of our most recent historic site survey. The survey provided Palm Beach with not only a comprehensive record of all the structures of the town prior to 1979, but also enabled us to have better data in order to preserve them. And with this data, we have a list of landmark properties, we have under consideration properties, and our newest program, which I'm going to turn over to Jordan to discuss, which is the historically significant building designation. And with that, I will send it over to you, Jordan.
Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Jordan Hodges. I'm a planner here in the office. But as Sarah said, the town, you can go to the next slide, Sarah. But the town recently completed a historic survey of the island. And as one of those results, the town adopted a new ordinance, which allows for the designation of historically significant buildings. Now, Palm Beach is really on the forefront of preservation planning on this issue, as it really allows property owners of significant buildings more flexibility in rehabilitating and improving their properties, while also preserving the character of our streetscapes and neighborhoods. The historically significant building program really provides a middle ground between landmark buildings and other buildings that might contribute to the character and really the architectural excellence of Palm Beach, but that may not meet the designation criteria required to become a full landmarked building. So the ordinance that created the HSB program in Palm Beach created what are called conservation districts. And these districts essentially cover the entire town. Now, being in a conservation district does not compel a property owner to do anything or add additional layers of review, but it does provide additional options for property owners of buildings which could be deemed as historically significant. And to reiterate, this is a completely voluntary program. But by the ordinance, a property must be located within a conservation district, and a building must be a minimum of 50 years old. In addition, the property must meet at least one of the criteria provided on the screen. And these evaluations of HSB applications are performed by the town's historic preservation consultants, Murphy Stillings. But the ordinance has been very successful, and 25 properties thus far have been designated by their owners as historically significant. Next slide. So why would anyone want their property to become a historically significant building? And that's really because being designated as a landmark property or an HSB comes with incentives that undesignated properties just aren't privy to. And this is important because some requirements in the Florida Building Code, such as flood-resistant construction requirements, can be very difficult to retrofit into historic district or into historic buildings, and they can be expensive to implement. So if someone's purchasing an older home on the island and wants to rehabilitate it, there are certain thresholds within the Florida Building Code that may mandate that a property or home be elevated or altered substantially to come into current compliance with the building code. Now, this can lead to unforeseen costs and significantly extended construction timelines for the property owner. Additionally, the appearance of the home is likely to change substantially if they are compelled to elevate. But one of the primary benefits of an HSB designation is that these properties become eligible for floodplain elevation variances. And I'll let Mr. Bergman discuss that process with you and what that means. But as you can see on the screen, current base flood elevation requirements can be significantly higher than that of historic construction. You'll notice the property on the right was built at a current base flood elevation requirement, whereas the 1920s structure on the left is significantly lower. Now, some of the 25 properties that have become designated as HSBs would likely have been demolished had they not been eligible for the variance due to the challenges of raising and retrofitting historic homes to current standards. Now, with that said, there is still a flood risk when you choose not to elevate, but this program gives property owners options where they can make decisions based on what works best for them at any given time. So if you have a potential buyer who is looking at an older property on the island who you think may benefit from this program, please mention it to them and have them or yourselves reach out to the office. So Sarah and I, along with the development review staff here in the town, work to process really all of our development applications that we receive. And we always encourage people to reach out with any kind of questions or comments. So you can find our contact information provided here on the slide. But I would now like to give the floor to Wayne Bergman. He is the town's floodplain administrator, building official, and director of planning, zoning, and building department, And I believe he is going to be going over FEMA requirements and some options for historic buildings.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jordan. My name is Wayne Bergman. I'm the Director of Planning, Zoning, and Building. And as Jordan said, I'm also the town's building official and floodplain administrator. And in all of these categories, I have about 30 years experience, especially with FEMA, Florida Building Code, comprehensive plans, amendments, EARs, enforcing the zoning code and land development regulations amendments. I received many questions in my job regarding FEMA, and I thought this was a perfect opportunity to talk about some of those items. So why is FEMA an issue in the Palm Beach real estate business? As Jordan said, it is because many owners and buyers love the charm and character of a home and want to renovate the home to meet their family needs and to reflect their lifestyle. However, once a building renovation reaches a certain dollar value, the FEMA regulations and the Florida Building Code regulations kick in and require that the building be elevated to meet the base flood elevation and, in this part of Florida, 1 foot of freeboard, basically the base flood elevation plus 1 foot. The owner or buyer many times decides against elevating the house due to the cost of raising the home or the aesthetics of an elevated house or the additional added steps and stairs necessary to access the home. And what we were finding is when these decisions were made, a lot of historic treasures in the town of Palm Beach were being demolished. So all of this relates to this situation on the slide, which is substantial improvement. So any combination of repair, reconstruction, rehabilitation, additions, or other improvements of a building or structure that take place during a 1-year period, the cumulative cost of which equals or exceeds 50% of the market value of the building or structure before the improvement or repair is started. For each building or structure, the 1-year period begins on the date that the first permit is issued for the improvement or repair of the building or structure. And then this goes into substantial damage, which is damage that is usually done from a storm. But as you can see, while this applies to every building throughout the state of Florida, there are 2 exceptions. First is when a building is being basically repaired to correct health code violations, sanitary situations, basically town identified violations that must be fixed to make the building livable, or exemption 2, an alteration of a historic structure. And the alteration will not preclude the historic significance of that building. One of the biggest benefits of the landmark program and the historically significant building program is the ability to renovate these buildings and meet the FEMA and Florida Building Code requirements. This is in our Chapter 50 code, which is our flood code, and this was updated in 2017. A variance is authorized to be issued for the repair, improvement, or rehabilitation of a historic building that is deemed eligible. So basically, if you have a landmark building or a building that has been designated a historically significant building, you have the ability to receive approval through the floodplain variance process to be exempt from the requirements of FEMA and some of the requirements of the Florida Building Code as they relate to elevating a building. This is a big deal. Any other building in the town of Palm Beach that is not historically significant or is not landmarked will not qualify for the floodplain variance. And if we go to the next slide, I have just a simple example of what all of this means. So let's say we have a structure value, a home value, not the property, just the building, of $500,000. If the owner is to do a project that consists of, let's say, replacing the roof, adding impact windows and doors, and maybe a kitchen remodel, the cost of that project, let's say, could be $250,000. This is a substantial improvement because the value of the project equals 50% of the value of the building. Therefore, this building must comply with the Florida Building Code and FEMA regulations and must be elevated to meet the base flood elevation plus 1 foot requirement. The only way this can be waived is if the building receives the floodplain variance. Now, looking at the same value of a structure of $500,000, if the owner did work that was $249,000 or less, it would not be a substantial improvement, and there is no mandate or variance needed to force the building to be elevated. Although the values are very high in Palm Beach, in most cases, the value is the land. Many times, we in this department find the values of buildings, which are also called improvements, very low. In these cases, if it looks like a subject project will be a substantial improvement based on the value that we get from, let's say, the Palm Beach County property appraiser, we do suggest to the applicant or to the owner to obtain an independent property appraisal from a private firm. These independent property appraisals generally come in much higher with regards to building value than what you can find on the county's website. Next slide, please. Another matter we get a lot of questions on relates to flood zones in the town. What are the various flood zones in the town of Palm Beach? Currently, I would break these up into 3 categories of zones. First is the AE, the Alpha Echo zones, which are special flood hazard areas impacted primarily by the intracoastal waterway and are defined by FEMA as areas that present a 1% annual chance of flooding. The second category is on the ocean, and that is called the VE, Victor Echo zones, which are special flood hazard areas along the coast that are subject to additional flooding from storm-induced wave action. And the third category is the safe zone, if you will, the X flood zones, relatively safe. X zones are areas outside of the 500-year floodplain and which have less than a 0.2% annual chance of flooding. And in the X flood zone, homes can be built at existing grade elevations. If you look at these 2 little maps on the screen in front of you, which are called fermets, able to be produced on the FEMA website for specific properties, you can see that there's, on the ocean side, there's VE zones. On the intercoastal side, there's the AE zones, but sort of in the middle of the island, you have colored zones that either have no impact in the aerial photographs or are shaded brown. These are the X flood zones, and these are, for lack of a better term, the safe flood zones on the island. These fermets, as I printed out, can be produced by going to the FEMA website and putting in a specific address in any part of the United States, and it will produce you a mini map like I have on the slide here, which will show you what zone your property is located in and what the impacts would be. Right now, all of our, if you could go back, right now, all of the flood zones on every community in America are shown on these FEMA maps. And they're called FIRMs. That stands for the Flood Insurance Rate Map. In the town of Palm Beach, the 2017 version of the FIRM is what is in effect now. And as you may know, there are preliminary flood maps for all of Palm Beach County being circulated, being reviewed, and actually under an appeal period at this moment. They're called the 2019 preliminary maps, but it is our expectation that they'll be adopted formally by all municipalities in Palm Beach County sometime in 2020. Next slide, please. It's worth noting that Palm Beach County filed an appeal of the proposed firm maps. The appeal is very technical in nature and deals with the type of modeling that FEMA used to determine the different flood zones throughout the county. Palm Beach County believes that the wind and the atmospheric pressure grid used in the modeling was far too coarse over the majority of the county, which resulted in a very inaccurate model results. We don't know if FEMA will buy that. That is in the appeal right now, and we'll know very soon whether the county was successful in their appeal. And then sort of to close out the discussion on FEMA, there's just a boatload of acronyms that are used, what we call FEMA talk, that we deal with on a daily basis. And I'm sure you have familiarity with some of these too. But as I mentioned, the flood zones, you have the AE, the Alpha Echo, the VE, the Victor Echo, the X. Those are the three categories of flood zones in Palm Beach. And the E stands for elevations that are determined. So if you're in an AE, you might be in an AE6 or an AE7, and that would be your base flood elevation. If you're in the VE, it might be a 10 or an 11 or a 12, and that would be your base flood elevation. The Florida Building Code currently requires for 1 foot of freeboard to be added to the FEMA base flood elevation to be compliant in the state of Florida. Special flood hazard area. These are the unsafe zones, and there's quite a bit of information. There are 2,210 single-family properties in Palm Beach. It might be interesting to know that the majority, 56.4% of them, are located in the special flood hazard area. Now, I said 2,210 single-family properties. There are actually 1,871 buildings located in the special flood hazard area, and we have over 1,400 acres of town located in the special flood hazard area. Other acronyms are the datum used, NAVD, the North American Vertical Datum. That is the datum that FEMA uses today, that the town uses today, and most surveyors would use today. The old datum was NGVD, National Geodetic Vertical Datum. That is being phased out. NGVD is 1.5 foot higher than NAVD measurements in the town of Palm Beach. BFE is the base flood elevation. The Florida Building Code, as I mentioned, requires a base flood elevation plus 1 foot of freeboard. So if you're in the AE6 flood zone, your lowest habitable floor must be at 7. There's also a study that is pending with our town council right now that was produced by the Woods Hole Group. You may have heard of this as well. And it's a coastal resiliency study that the Woods Hole Group did for the town. And their current recommendation pending before the town and the town council is to increase the freeboard from 1 foot to 3 foot. That is just a recommendation. The town council is reviewing that along with staff, and a decision will be made probably sometime in the next few months on whether this is a recommendation that can be embraced. But basically what FEMA and the Florida Building Code and what the world is doing is pushing the finished floor elevations of homes and buildings to higher elevations. And that is producing taller homes, and which in our community has resulted in enormous amounts of fill placed on lots, which have great impacts to neighbors, not only on aesthetics, but sometimes on drainage. Some other acronyms are the CRS. This is a voluntary program that the town participates in. It's the community rating system, which is basically governed by ISO, working for FEMA. It is the way that all communities in the United States are rated on how well they enforce floodplain management regulations that they adopt. So the way FEMA works is we adopt as the town an ordinance, in our case is Chapter 50, that brings all of the federal FEMA regulations into the town through a town ordinance. We did this through a DEM, a Department of Emergency Management of the state of Florida model ordinance. And as I said, that was adopted back in 2017. The town is currently a Class 6 CRS community. That's an improvement from the Class 7 we were at last year. And what that does, it provides a 20% insurance premium discount for properties located in a special flood hazard area. And for those located in the X-flood zone that choose to purchase flood insurance, there is a 10% discount. And just while we're on insurance policies, I thought it might be interesting to note that we did a study last year of all the FEMA documents. These are not public documents. They're available to us through the CRS program. There are 7,330 flood insurance policies in force in the town of Palm Beach. And that may seem high when I told you there were only 2,210 single-family properties, but a separate policy is required for each and every building. And as you know, some properties have multiple buildings, a main house, a guest house, a garage, etc. There are also the premiums and fees of all of these policies last year was $5,271,000. And the total flood insurance in force last year was almost $2 billion just in the town. So flood insurance on a coastal barrier island is a big deal. And it's also a big business. If you ever have any questions regarding FEMA, please contact this department. We have right now two certified floodplain managers and myself available for any type of FEMA questions or challenges. If you're working with clients, although we're under the 2017 maps, there are changes coming up in the 2019 preliminary maps. And in some cases, it's worth looking to see what the new flood zone designation would be for a property, because rather than considering knocking something down and building it 1 foot taller, you may be looking at 2 foot in some cases. And in other cases, you may be looking at going from a special flood hazard area into the X safe zone. So with that, I think the town group is ready to sign off and take some questions on behalf of Sarah and Jordan and James and the entire staff of the Planning, Zoning, and Building Department. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. And even after today, if you have any questions at all regarding Landmarks program, our new historically significant building program, or any questions on FEMA, please contact us directly. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Wayne and Sarah and Jordan and James. That was a wonderful presentation. And I also wanted to say thank you to Murphy Stillings. We do have Janet Murphy and Emily Stillings on the line this morning. They are the town's historic preservation consultants, and so work with town staff very much when it comes to the cases to be reviewed for historic properties. So I've been moderating and looking at the Q&A feature. I don't see any questions that have come in so far. And so I'm sure that if people do have questions, they'll continue to add them to the Q&A, or perhaps we'll contact you all directly. So thank you for sharing your contact information. And since I still don't see any questions coming in, I'll just say thank you again to all of you for participating this morning. And we can go ahead and get started with the next presentation.
Thank you.
All right, so I want to spend some time this morning talking with you all about landmarks, and I called this the what, why, and how, because I'm hoping that we can answer a lot of questions that typically come up with with what do I do with a landmark? How do I market a landmark? What does it mean to be a landmark? These are questions that I often hear come up. And so I am hoping that we'll be able to address a lot of those this morning. So 5 key objectives for our presentation. The first is, why do we preserve? You know, why is the work that we're doing for landmarks and for historically significant buildings important? How does landmarking affect my property? How do I make compatible changes to a landmark? You can absolutely make changes to a landmark. And so it's all about, how do you make compatible changes? What are the benefits of owning a landmark? Because there are a lot of benefits. And then last, what are the resources that are available to help you all as realtors and to help homeowners and members of the public to better understand the landmarks process and how you actually go about getting your project through the process? And so just to start for a moment with the why do we landmark and why do we care about historic buildings, I think it's there's a few different philosophies to look at here. And so the first I want to share with you is what's in the town's code. And I believe Sarah mentioned this morning as well, that in the preamble to the town's historic preservation ordinance, there's a lot of information about why preservation is important. The code says that preservation is important because it protects, enhances, and perpetuates those properties in the town that reflect our important history. It safeguards the town's historic and cultural heritage. It can stabilize and improve property values, and we're certainly going to talk more about property values this morning, something that I know is always on everybody's minds. Preservation fosters civic pride, and it protects and enhances the town's attraction to its residents and to visitors, can strengthen the economy of the town, and that it promotes the education, pleasure, and welfare of the historic districts and landmarks for everyone to enjoy. Another philosophy to think about when it comes to why we preserve is a question of, why do old places matter? Why do old places matter to us? So there was a wonderful series of articles that was done by Tom Mays. He is an attorney with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and he spent a year in Rome thinking about why old places matter. Sounds like a wonderful year to me. And he came up with a variety of different topics that he wrote a series of essays and actually published a book about. And he said that old places matter for a lot of reasons. The first of those being this idea of continuity, ancestry, memory, and identity, that our historic places connect us with the past. They remind us that we are part of a continuum of history, and they connect us to those people who lived here before us and those people that will come after us. Historic places matter because of history and learning. The fact that you can better understand and learn about history when you can actually physically and tangibly interact with a historic building. For example, that's why children often come to our Little Red Schoolhouse Living History program, where they get to step back in time and experience a day in 1886 as a pioneer school child. And that experience of actually being able to interact and go to school in the building is far different than just reading about pioneer life in a textbook. Our historic places matter because they're beautiful and they represent architecture of it with a capital A, sometimes described as the best of the designs of the times. And our historic places might be our sacred places, and we have very particular connections to those. And then last, a few different factors, that one being creativity. There's been studies that have been done that show that people feel more creative in historic settings. They've actually studied creative output in historic areas versus new areas and found that people are more creative in historic areas. In terms of sustainability, we know that the greenest building is the one that's already been built, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Community. Our historic buildings help us to have a sense of community and to be part of that greater sense of community. And the last part is economics. And again, we're going to have a whole presentation on this morning, so please stay tuned, because we're going to talk about why preservation just really makes financial sense. And then the last philosophy I want to share with you is from the National Historic Preservation Act. This is codified national language, and it says that the preservation of this irreplaceable heritage is in the public interest so that its vital legacy of cultural, educational, aesthetic, inspirational, economic, and energy benefits will be maintained and enriched for future generations of Americans. And I just think that this is really powerful language coming out of federal code. So this morning, I also want to do some myth busting with you all along the way. I've heard from some realtors that have lent their ears about this presentation that there are a lot of common misconceptions when it comes to preservation. And so the first myth that I wanted to share is, sometimes I've heard people don't care about that historic stuff. And in reality, a recent survey of town residents found that over 94% of people think that the historic character of the town is important and that the loss of that character would negatively affect the town. Now, Donovan Ripkema is going to talk at length about this later, so please make sure you tune in for that because he will be going over the full results of the survey. But over 94% of people think that the historic character of the town is important. So before we get into the specifics of preservation in Palm Beach, I want to just take a moment to talk about some significant dates in national preservation history because it relates to how we do preservation here at a local level. So the first one I want to focus on is way back in 1853 with the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. This is really where preservation found its foothold in the United States. Certainly preservation as a concept existed well before that, but this is one of the first notable projects where there was a grassroots effort by people to acquire and to restore and actually maintain a historic structure at Mount Vernon, George Washington's home. And so moving on from that, I'd like to focus on the 1960s. As many of you probably know, urban renewal was tearing through a lot of United States cities in the 1960s. And so many wonderful historic buildings were torn down during this time period. And you can see here on the screen is an image in the top of Penn Station, which was demolished, and there was huge outcry about this. And the outcry about the structure being demolished is what really led in 1966 to the National Historic Preservation Act, which recognized that we have wonderful historic resources in the country that need to be preserved for future generations to enjoy. And then the last key date that I want to focus on is in 1978 with the Penn Central versus New York ruling. This is a case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The request was for a developer to put a 55-story tower on top of Grand Central Station in New York City. And the Landmarks Preservation Commission denied the request, saying that putting a 55-story tower on top would substantially alter and negatively affect the historic resource of Grand Central. And obviously the developers for the project were not happy about that ruling and so sued the city over it, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the crux of the complaint was that their property rights were being taken away because they couldn't build their tower. And the Supreme Court actually found that the valid public purpose that preservation serves is not a taking, that in this case and in many preservation cases, there is still a reasonable economic return that can be achieved with the terminal station as it was, and therefore it was not a taking of their property rights. They also found that the taking, you would need to be deprived of all economic value of a property for it to be considered a taking. And so this landmark legislation is really still what sets the tone today for the valid public purpose and the police powers, if you will, it's called, that preservation has to be able to help a community to moderate the way that historic buildings are affected and the way that they grow and change over time. And so that ruling happened in 1978, and I want to put that in context of preservation in the town of Palm Beach. So in Palm Beach, as we know, was incorporated in 1911. The art jury was formed in 1928, and because that was formed, there's been a strong history of design review in the town of Palm Beach almost since the very beginning. And I would say that it's largely because of that we have this wonderful, cohesive, beautiful character that we have in the town of Palm Beach. Now in 1973, Landmark Architecture of Palm Beach was published. That was by Barbara Hofstadt, who was really the founder and the mother of preservation in Palm Beach. She felt very strongly about the wonderful historic character that we all enjoy, and so surveyed the island oftentimes on her bicycle to actually look for all of the wonderful historic buildings we have. And then that led to the Landmarks Ordinance being adopted in 1979. And then the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach was formed in 1980. And so you can see that landmark case that I was telling you about was in 1978, and the town's preservation ordinance was passed just a year later, and then the foundation was formed. So in terms of a call to action, I mentioned that the Landmarks Preservation Commission was formed, and that was right when the ordinance was adopted in 1979. That ordinance authorized the Landmarks Preservation Commission to do the work that they do. They were given authority to designate individual buildings and historic districts. The Preservation Commission oversees changes to landmark properties and now historically significant buildings through a certificate of appropriateness process. You all might be familiar with that. Maybe you've heard of it. We often call it a COA for short, but a certificate of appropriateness process. And the commission continues to do that important work today, and they're supported by the wonderful staff that you all had an opportunity to hear from this morning. And so the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach, we are a nonprofit organization that was formed in 1980 in response to the passing of the ordinance and all of the designations and everything that were happening. We tried to galvanize public opinion in support of historic preservation and educate citizens about their heritage. In the beginning, former landmark commissioners became board members at the foundation and helped to bridge that gap between public and private preservation efforts. And the foundation continues to support the commission and preservation efforts today. So I'd like to do one more myth busting here. So the myth is that once you're landmarked, someone is going to come over and tell you that you need to make changes to your house. And that's absolutely not true. It's only when an owner chooses to make alterations to a property that the design review process initiates. So let's talk about the effects of landmarking. Now that we've talked about why we landmark, let's talk about what it really means for a property. So, and you heard some of this from Sarah this morning as well, that all properties in the town require review for alterations. Some requests can be approved at staff level and some require commission review. Landmark structures and historically significant buildings are reviewed by the Landmarks Preservation Commission, whereas non-landmark structures are reviewed by the Architectural Commission. So being a landmark doesn't add an additional layer of review, it just substitutes landmarks review for Architectural Commission review. And both boards have review criteria for analyzing requests that come before them. And changes to landmarks require a certificate of appropriateness and are reviewed with a particular focus on keeping the architectural quality and historic character of the building. So let's talk a little bit about what landmarking does and does not do. Landmarking does preserve important buildings in the community, and it does enhance property values. And again, we're going to hear a lot more about that with our last presentation today. It requires Landmarks Commission review in place of Architectural Commission review, and it offers restoration and rehabilitation information to property owners. You can absolutely do normal maintenance without review, and you can have quick administrative approval for minor changes to properties. Landmarking encourages historic research and community pride, and it preserves the historic and cultural integrity of Palm Beach. So the things that Landmark doesn't do. Landmark does not change any of the existing zoning on the property. It doesn't prohibit redevelopment. It does not lead to declines in property values or take away property rights, as I was mentioning before. It does not affect interior changes for the majority of cases, unless an owner is specifically requesting a tax abatement. And we'll talk more about that. It does not require restoration. Again, nobody's going to come out to your property and tell you what you need to do. It doesn't restrict normal maintenance, and it doesn't prevent modernizing a building. You can absolutely modernize and continue to improve historic structures well into the future. It doesn't require the building to be open to the public or have a historic sign, although there are historic landmark plaques, and many people that have put those up on their homes, I think, feel very proud to be able to do so, but it's not a requirement, and it doesn't lead to a listing on a tourism map in any way. So just to talk a little bit about the process of becoming a landmark, I've had some questions come in about this. And so the landmarks designation process, there was a townwide survey of potential historic properties. Now this is updated at least once every 10 years. So the latest survey was just completed in 2020. And that survey is typically done to look at all of the different properties on the island and assess which properties may have the potential to be considered historic. The Landmarks Preservation Commission reviews that information. They review recommendations from the consultants and discuss amongst one another and actually vote to place properties under consideration for landmarking. The owners are notified about this potential consideration for designation. And after that, then a research designation report is prepared that talks about the history of the building, the ownership of the building, and lists the important features of the building. Now, that report is presented to the Landmarks Preservation Commission for their review and for their recommendation. The property owners are certainly welcome and encouraged to give their input. They have an opportunity to be heard throughout this process. And then after the case goes through the Landmarks Preservation Commission, if they recommend it to the town council, then town council is actually the governing body that approves or denies the designation. And again, you have the opportunity to be heard, to attend those meetings, and owners can absolutely give their input on the request to designate a property. And so when these properties are designated, I think it's important to know that there's several different reasons that a property can be designated. There's actually 5 different criteria in the town. The first is that it could reflect the history of the nation, state, county, or town. The second is it can be identified with historic people or with important events. The third, and many of our structures fall under this category, is that they can embody distinguishing characteristics of one or more architectural types, or perhaps methods of construction or craftsmanship. The fourth is that it's the representative work of a notable master builder, designer, or architect. And the last is that it constitutes a unique area of architecture, landscaping, and planning. This can occasionally be used for historic districts, of which we do have a few small districts in the town that have already been designated. So all of this is to say that when we talk about landmarks, I think when you hear the word landmark, everybody conjures up the image in their mind, perhaps of something like the Breakers. And you think of landmark as being this type of really grand, wonderful, elaborate structure. And we certainly have many of those in the town of Palm Beach. But we also have structures such as this beautiful bungalow on Brazilian Avenue that are considered a landmark. Now, they represent different parts of the town's history. They represent different architectural styles, different levels of intensity and development, but both tell an important story about the town and its development, and both help people to understand what was important historically and hopefully will be important long into the future for the town of Palm Beach in protecting that historic character. And we also, as I mentioned, do have a few historic districts. For example, the Regents Park Historic District is a wonderful collection of 5 historic homes. So again, the goals of landmarking is really to protect the historic character of the town. I mentioned that we found that over 90% of people support that historic character in the town. And so that's really the goal of the Landmarks program. And it also is one of their goals to manage change. Preservation is not about stopping all change. It's about managing that change to make sure that you can allow compatible changes to a historic building to where you respect the historic character, but still allow our buildings to be livable and lovable for today. And you can absolutely make alterations and improvements to your historic buildings. So in terms of the design review process, again, a little bit about what it does and does not do. The design review process does follow the local code provisions. It considers what are called the elements of integrity, meaning how well does the resource still convey its integrity? Does it still have its same location and design, setting, the materials, workmanship, feeling, and association? All of this is to say, how much can you understand the historic nature of the resource based on how it looks today? Now, design review considers the quality of significance, those reasons that it was designated in the first place, and it also considers the features that are original on the property or that are historic to the property. And it reviews generally exterior alterations. Design review does not make decisions based solely on what is pretty, although of course our buildings are beautiful and the work that's being done to them is beautiful, but the decisions are taking into account more than that. They're taking into account whether or not it's compatible and appropriate for the structure and reflects the historic character of the property. Design review doesn't always have a one-size-fits-all solution. All of our buildings are unique and different, and therefore there's really not a one-size-fits-all solution because what's appropriate on one building may not be appropriate on another building, solely because of the fact that every building is unique and therefore every building has its own particular solution. Design review doesn't mean a building can't make compatible changes. You can make compatible changes, and it does not review minor interior spaces. So another myth busting here. They're going to tell me what I can do with my kitchen and bathrooms. And no, that's absolutely not true. For typical projects, only exterior alterations are reviewed. For tax abatement projects, the interiors are reviewed, but again, that's only if the owner requests to participate in that tax abatement process, which is a wonderful incentive available to landmark properties. So if the owner chooses to participate in the tax abatement process and go for that incentive, then the interiors are reviewed, but it's only the major historic rooms, such as the entryway, the living room, or the dining room. There's not review of the bathrooms and kitchens or other back of house features like that. So to recap on the different review types, which you heard the town mention this morning, you have landmarks, historically significant buildings, and then tax abatement program, the tax abatement program for landmarks. So they are reviewed by the Landmarks Preservation Commission. Tax abatements require ratification by town council. They all follow the Palm Beach Code criteria. And historically significant buildings and tax abatements do follow the Secretary of the Interior standards. Maybe you all have heard of these, and we're going to talk about them very briefly this morning. Again, exterior changes are reviewed in all cases, but for the tax abatement, only those primary interior rooms can also be reviewed. And being a landmark or a historically significant building qualifies the building for building code and FEMA exemptions. And then last, a landmark is designated by the Landmarks Preservation Commission and Town Council. And the historically significant building, again, is only at the owner's request. And with a tax abatement, it's again at the owner's request, and it's available only to landmarks, and you have to have a 10-year covenant that says that you will protect and maintain the property for at least 10 years after you've done the work. Now, you can make additional changes along the way, even if you're under a tax abatement, but you just have to have those approved by the Landmarks Preservation Commission. So a little bit more myth busting here. The myth is I can't replace my roof. And in reality, you can absolutely replace a deteriorated roof. Generally, the new roof should match the old in material, color, and design. And I would say that I used a roof as an example here, but this applies to things like deteriorated exterior siding materials, windows, doors, all of those common features that you see on a building. When they're deteriorated, generally, you can look for a replacement that would match the old in material, color, and design. And I have on the screen here two very different examples of historic buildings. So on the left-hand side here, you have a historic Mediterranean revival building. And so if the property owner were to want to replace a roof on this type of Mediterranean revival structure, you would want to look at that material, color, and design. So here you can see a terracotta barrel tile roof. So replacement with a new terracotta barrel tile roof would be appropriate. On the right-hand side, you can see a British colonial style structure that has a flat white tile roof. Now, both of these have tile roofs, so going back with a tile roof is appropriate, but you can see that they have a very different character and they have very different features. And so going back with a barrel tile roof versus a white tile roof makes a big difference in preserving and respecting the architectural character of the property. And in general, that's what you want to do if you're making changes to historic buildings. You want to make sure that the changes you're proposing are in keeping with the architectural style, with the historic features, and that are replicating or replacing those original features if they can't be repaired. So the next myth busting here is that I can't put an addition on my historic house. And in reality, yes, you can. Compatible additions to historic houses are often reviewed and approved by the Landmarks Preservation Commission. In fact, additions often can be placed on side elevations or on rear elevations to where they're barely visible from the street or maybe not even visible from the street. They don't negatively affect the historic character of the property. Oftentimes, additions can greatly expand the footprint of the building. There's really a lot of flexibility when it comes to being able to add on to historic buildings, as long as it's done in a compatible and sensitive manner. And one more myth busting here. The myth is that I can't tear down a landmark. And actually that one's true. So I just wanted to make sure you all were paying attention this morning here, but it is true that you can't tear down a landmark structure. But there are often non-historic parts or portions of a landmark that can be removed as part of a renovation process. So again, historic structures have grown and evolved over the years. And so if there are non-original features that are not considered historic or significant on the building, those can certainly be removed in order to make way for additional renovation plans, perhaps for a new addition. And you know, if you can see here on the screen, it says they don't build houses like that anymore. Now in Palm Beach, we have a wonderful culture of building and wonderful craftsmanship, but our historic buildings used materials and design features that were just really truly unique and special. And so it's important to preserve those, and tearing down a landmark would take away all of those historic features, and it would put them in a landfill, which is really not a great best practice today with sustainability in mind and resiliency in mind. And so it's true that generally you're not going to be able to tear down a landmark. Now, of course, there are extenuating circumstances, you know, fire damage or some sort of natural disasters. That's a very different story. But generally speaking, you want to preserve and maintain a landmark, but you can certainly make alterations to it along the way. So when it comes to design review, and I'm going to call this the, you know, getting your project through the process, there's a lot of important considerations to keep in mind. And so for you all as realtors, when you are perhaps selling a property and you know a homeowner is considering wanting to make changes to the property, some things that they might want to consider is, what are they talking about changing? Is it an important character defining feature on the property? We use this terminology a lot in preservation. Character defining features typically are the things that if you wanted to describe a property to somebody, what would you tell them about it? You would probably talk about the windows, you might talk about the roof, maybe the doors, the siding material, the design style, different features maybe that are on that building if it has additional decorative features on it. But those are typically what's considered character defining features on the property. So that's the first thing to think about. And then, are they original features or are they historic features? And are they deteriorated or could they be maintained? And how visible are they? So in talking about a hierarchy of visibility, obviously the front facade, what's going to be most visible from the street, is always going to be of primary importance, followed by the side facades, where you can typically see a portion of those from the street as well. And then with the rear of the building or perhaps interior courtyard spaces having the most flexibility. And then you want to think about, does it match? You know, when we all get dressed, we want to think about an outfit that matches. So when you make changes to your historic building, you want to think about whether or not it matches. And just like I was showing you with the roof examples, you want to make sure that it matches in different color and material and design and style. So you can absolutely go back with a new product, but it needs to match. Does it reflect the architectural style? And is it correct to that architectural style? So again, substituting a tile roof for a tile roof might be fine, but needs to be the one that matches the architectural style. A barrel tile roof matches a Mediterranean structure, whereas a flat white tile matches a British colonial type structure. And then last, is it a compatible change? And you hear us talk about this a lot in preservation, but generally, is it compatible? Does it respect and enhance the historic character of the property, or does it take away important historic features of the property? Is what they're planning to do compatible? So these are the things to consider. I would say that these are also a lot of the factors that can hold up projects along the way. So it's definitely possible to make changes as long as you're thinking about some of these considerations, and if projects are designed to be able to respect these considerations. So I mentioned the Secretary of the Interior standards, and we're not going to go through them in depth this morning. We could probably talk about those for a whole hour in and of itself. But what I want to just show you all is that these exist. They are 10 standards. They are used and they are used for tax abatement projects and also for historically significant buildings. They're considered as best practices for historic preservation throughout the country. They're used at a national, a state, and then the local level. And so the standards in particular that I'm going to focus on are the standards for rehabilitation. And that's what we use 99% of the time in preservation. And so you'll see some common language here that I've highlighted that really talks about retaining and preserving. That's really the crux of the Secretary of the Interior standards. They advocate for minimal change to retain and preserve the historic character of the property and those features that make the property historic and important. It says that if new features are needed, they should match the old, which we already talked about this morning. And then they get into some information about gentle treatments for cleaning, archaeological resources, and then the best practices for doing additions and related new construction on a property. But really, the big takeaway from the Secretary of the Interior standards is that it's always best to repair if possible. You want to retain and preserve those features that are important and significant on the building. And then if needed and you need to replace something, that you use the most similar material available and that you replicate as closely as possible in size, shape, design, color, and all of those features that make the building unique. So in talking about our landmarks in the town, I'm sure a lot of you probably won't be surprised to see this little pie chart here. And I would love to be able to ask if anybody can guess what the 184 structures represents, but I'll give you the answer, and that's Mediterranean Revival. So you can see that over half of the structures that are actually designated as landmarks in the town are Mediterranean Revival. It is, of course, an incredibly important style in South Florida, and in particular in Palm Beach. And our Mediterranean Revival structures are wonderful and beautiful and reflect that very rich architectural character of the town. But we do have a lot of other historic styles as well. And so it's important to know that there are many more styles beyond Mediterranean Revival that are historic. We have a wonderful collection of colonial revival structures, of neoclassical revival, of Palm Beach Regency, which is really, really unique to Palm Beach, was largely developed for Palm Beach. And then we also have Georgian structures and Art Moderne and Art Deco structures. We have frame vernacular and bungalow. So there's a really wide range of a variety of different structures and styles throughout the community. And just focusing a little bit, we actually, we use this similar timeline with some of our heritage education programs. And you can see in the middle of the screen here that the Mediterranean Revival period was from around 1919 to 1928. It was actually a very short period in the town's history, but led to so many of the wonderful landmarks that we have. But if you can see here, we also have a lot of other architectural style periods that reflect the overall design and development of this community. And so it's important that our landmarks reflect that. You know, there are structures that are frame vernacular that are from the pioneer era that tell a very important story of Palm Beach's foundings, of those early pioneers that were willing to come here to Mosquito County to take on trying to be a pioneer in Palm Beach. And so it's important that our landmarks reflect that. And you can see that we have everything from Queen Anne shingle style to bungalows and colonial revivals. And then we also have a very significant time period for Art Deco and for mid-century structures. Now, this is, I think, being considered more in recent years, but is certainly an important part of how this community grew over time and how architectural styles would grow and evolve over time. And so just keep in mind that there is a wide range of styles that can be considered historic. And so the changes that you might want to make to a property need to be considered with particular focus on what made that style important. So you can see here all of the properties on the screen are landmarks, and they're all incredibly different. They have very different features. You might have a white tile roof or a wood shingle roof, a barrel tile roof, and you might have a low-lying one-story character. You might have a two-story character. Maybe the house has elaborate brick or stonework, or maybe it has more simple stucco work. Each property is unique, and that's what makes this community so interesting architecturally, is that all of these structures are unique. They all provide something different to look at as you're going around the community. And so you want to make sure that when you are selling historic structures, when people are considering renovating them, that you respect those unique characteristics, because that's what really lends so much to the character and charm of the town that we all know and love. And so let's talk about the benefits of owning a landmark. Why would somebody want to have a landmark, and how can it benefit them? So there are two tax credit benefits that I'm going to get into a little bit more. One is a 20% federal tax credit, and the other is a local tax abatement program. There are building code exemptions available for historic buildings. And so when you are planning a renovation to a historic building, it's important that your design professional communicate with town staff as needed to be able to utilize those building code exemptions, because there is a specific portion of the Florida Building Code that allows for greater flexibility when it comes to reviewing changes to a historic building. There's also the FEMA exemptions that you heard Mr. Bergman speaking about this morning. So really, as a landmark or a historically significant building, you have a choice when it comes to the FEMA exemption. You can choose to elevate your building, or you can choose to take advantage of the exemption and perhaps delay elevation or utilize other methods of protecting your property from rising waters. But you have a choice, and that's a big difference with a landmark. If you're not a landmark or a historically significant building and you make that substantial improvement that Mr. Bergman talked about, you don't have a choice. You must comply with the FEMA flood elevation. But as a landmark, you have the added benefit of having a choice of how to best protect your property, and for right now and for in the future. You also potentially have the ability to apply for zoning code relief. I highlight this because this is being developed in the town right now, and so I encourage you all to follow this process. But there is zoning relief that's being discussed for historic properties, recognizing the fact that our historic properties often weren't built to today's codes, and therefore there might need to be special considerations given to how those properties grow and evolve. And so again, this is currently being developed in the town right now, so I encourage you all to follow along with that process. It's also a benefit of expedited plan review. The town has said that landmark properties and historically significant buildings do receive expedited plan review to help make sure that they are moving quickly through the process and able to accomplish the goals of the property owners. And another benefit is that preservation is sustainable. You can see here on the screen that the average historic house that was retained rather than razed or demolished reduced the impact on the landfill by 116.6 tons. So in preservation, you often see comparisons of, how much material is being put into landfill, also comparisons of recycling cans. We all, I think, generally recycle, right? We like to recycle our aluminum cans or plastic, all of that. But the reality is that tearing down one historic building can actually wipe out the impact of recycling millions of aluminum cans. And so retaining and preserving those important historic buildings is not only great for our community, but it's also a very sustainable practice. Historic properties lend to a wonderful quality of life. Again, over 90% of people in the town felt that the historic character is important. We have beautiful walkable neighborhoods, beautiful surroundings, and so that quality of life that so many love and enjoy in Palm Beach is at least in part because of the wonderful historic character that the town enjoys. And then the last two, I think one of the big benefits of being a landmark, of owning a landmark property, is this idea of stewardship, that the property that you have, that you are the steward of that property for the time that you have it. And therefore you're linked to the people that were there before you and took care of it, and the people that will come after you. And you know that that property is going to exist long into the future, maybe to be passed down to future generations of your family or to another family that will continue to love and utilize and renovate and enjoy this historic property. And not only for the people who own it, but you're also stewarding that for the community so that the community can continue to enjoy what they love so much about the historic character of the town. And the last thing that I want to put on here is just the landmarks plaque. Again, this is optional. Every landmark does receive one. You don't have to put it up, but there are many people who feel, I think, a very strong connection to being able to officially display that plaque in front of their home and feel very proud to be able to say that they own a landmark and that they are taking care of that landmark and stewarding it into the future. And so one big incentive that I want to highlight here is the tax abatement versus the tax credit program. Now, most of our properties, if you're going to look for a tax incentive, will probably be on the tax abatement side. That is a local program that's approved by the Landmarks Preservation Commission, Town Council, and then eventually the Board of County Commissioners. And that does review the interior and exterior changes. It's available to all properties, residential or commercial. So again, if you have a single family residence, this would be the program that you might consider. Now, the benefit of this program is a delay in the increased ad valorem taxes due to additions and renovations for a period of 10 years. So it does not remove all tax liability. It only delays the increase in taxes as a result of renovations. So if you take on a renovation project and put a certain amount of money into the project, generally speaking, the property appraiser will come back and raise the value of your property as a result of those renovations. This process allows that increase in value to be delayed for 10 years, and therefore you still pay taxes on the pre-renovation value, but you don't have to pay the increase in taxes until after the 10-year period is over. Now, it does have a covenant required, meaning you have to maintain those improvements that you got approval for. You can make additional changes along the way as long as they're approved by the board and they're deemed to be compatible. And this important incentive runs with the property. So if the property is transferred or sold in some way, the incentive continues to run for the 10-year period, and it does not interfere with a homestead exemption. Both can exist on the property at the same time. Now, on the tax credit side, the federal tax credit is approved at the state level and by the National Park Service. It is interior and exterior changes, and this is only for income producing properties. So this is a really important key feature to note. This is generally used for commercial properties. And so the benefit, though, is quite substantial, and it's a 20% direct tax credit for qualified expenses. So for example, if you have $1 million project and you have 200,000 and you have $1 million worth of qualified expenses, then you can get up to 20%, so a $200,000 tax credit to help offset the cost of that project. And so the current ruling on it is that you can carry that tax credit back 1 year and forward 20 years. This rule changes very, very often, so I'm just making note of that. A covenant is required, and there are many rules that often change regarding how this combines with other tax credits and benefits. So I think the most important thing to know about this tax credit is that it's only for income producing properties, but it can be a substantial savings if it is an income producing property. So tax abatement is local and for residential or commercial. Tax credit is a federal program, and that's only for income producing properties. So one more myth buster here, that landmarking hurts property values. And the reality is that the recent study that was just completed by PlaceEconomics shows that landmarks actually experience a premium of 6.2% to 13.7% in the marketplace. And I put this in here. Donovan is going to expand on this and tell you more about different submarkets in Palm Beach and how this premium is really affected, and more information about how it was obtained. But I want you all to know that landmarking actually helps properties. It helps them experience a premium in the marketplace. So the last thing that I want to talk about this morning is resources, because as you all are doing the very valuable work that you do as realtors, there's a lot of resources available to you, and I want you to know about those. So some of the resources to consider is the town staff. So you've met them all virtually this morning. Town staff is available to answer your questions, to help guide you in the process, to help direct you where to find additional information. So if you have questions about a potential project or landmarking process or anything like that, town staff is available, as are the town's historic preservation consultants. So Janet Murphy and Emily Stillings from Murphy Stillings are available to assist and to conduct site visits if needed, to have conversations and answer questions about potential projects. You also have the Landmarks Preservation Commission. They are advocates in the community for the preservation and protection of historic buildings. And they also have a wonderful deep knowledge of historic properties and what it takes to renovate. And they see these projects routinely. So you have the ability to turn to them as a resource. And then last, I want to talk about the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach, because we are absolutely here to support you in the work that you do and to be a resource for you along the way. So a little bit more about the foundation. We are an advocacy and education organization. We do award programs. We have publications and internships and scholarship programs. We have a fantastic archives and library. If you have not been here, I'd like to invite you all to visit our headquarters here at 311 Peruvian Avenue and come see our archives in our library, come see Pan's Garden, and just come over here and visit with us. We can assist with research. We hold wonderful architectural collections of Shoemate, Harding, Wyeth, and Volk. We have over 50,000 architectural drawings. And so we also have a collection of over 3,000 house files with information about different properties within the town. And then when it comes to our programming, we host a lecture series. Every year we have a historic properties workshop, walking tours, exhibits, special events. And then we have a special focus on education. We do a heritage education program for children, school children in the area. We have the Little Red Schoolhouse that we oversee and operate, that in a normal year has children coming from all over South Florida every day of the year to experience what it's like in 1886 Pioneer Schoolhouse. We have Pan's Garden, which is just a fabulous resource. It is the first all-native botanical garden in the state of Florida. And so if you haven't been to Pan's Garden, please come check it out and speak with Susan Lerner, our Director of Horticulture. And we have education classes focusing on the garden. And so I want you all to know that we're here to help, and we can help you in a variety of ways. So the first of those is with our archives. We are very fortunate as an organization, as a nonprofit organization, that our archives and the work that we do is supported by our very generous members. And so we're here to help you. And in our archives, our director of archives can assist with research. She can assist with pulling historic drawings, historic images, the property files, potentially with helping you find additional information that can help with marketing your property, that can help with the buying and selling process. Because oftentimes there's a value associated with the property based on the architect that designed it, the historic style that it's designed, and the architectural features. And so as realtors, if you have a property that you're listing, you can absolutely contact Marie to be able to do some research on the property and reach out to see what type of information we have. And that's Marie Penny, our director of archives. Next, we are an advocacy organization, and we are advocates throughout the entire process. So we can assist you with questions regarding landmarks or landscapes, projects, and the benefits of landmarking. So in particular, you're welcome to contact me as the Director of Education. If you have a client that is considering a project, they're considering purchasing a property, and they're not sure if they might be able to do a certain scope of work, you can always reach out at any point in time in the process, whether it's before the property has been purchased or it's right after it's been purchased, during the landmarks review process. I'm here, and the foundation is here to be able to help answer those questions. And so I encourage you to do that. Also, our Director of Horticulture, Susan Lerner, is available to answer questions about the wonderful benefits of native plants and the beauty of those native plants and how they can be incorporated in your landscapes. And then last, we provide numerous opportunities throughout the year to learn more about landmarks and what makes Palm Beach a truly special place. And so I hope that you'll all join us for those events and continue to learn more about Palm Beach and landmarks. And on that note, I want to highlight one of our upcoming events, which is our 2021 Flood Risk Workshop. This is open to the public, again, December 3rd from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. This is a workshop style event. So property owners, members of the public can receive customized information regarding how your property may be affected by floodwaters during this interactive open house event. So I invite you all to join us, and that is here at the foundation. And so I think I'll just close by saying that your support really matters. And we appreciate all of the hard work that you do. We appreciate your support. You know, you as realtors are oftentimes the property owner's first point of contact. And so the interaction that they have with you, the information that they gain from you, really can set the tone for how they proceed in the future. First impressions are everything, right? And so the first impression can set the tone for a property. If you are helping somebody to buy, or you're selling a landmark property, and you can speak about the wonderful historic character of the town and the historic features on the property and how it's a wonderful part of the community that's going to be passed on for future generations, I think that sets a certain tone. Whereas, you know, saying that, oh, it's a landmark and you may have to go through this difficult process, which hopefully I've dispelled the myth that it's a difficult process. It's really not, but that can set a different tone for the property. So I hope that you all will continue to be our partners and advocates for the wonderful landmark properties that we have in the town. And last, you're connecting properties and stewards. So you are helping the homeowner to find the property that they're going to love and that they're going to be able to accomplish their goals in. And so finding the right property for the right owner is a big part of what you all do. And it's very important to connect those properties with stewards, with people that will want to be able to take care of them and to manage those historic properties and to continue to take care of them long into the future. And so I just want to mention this quote over here. This was from a 2005 study that the foundation did on landmark property values. And it actually talks about that the perceptions, positive or negative, has a big impact on market participants, and in particular that there's a direct correlation into the marketing emphasis for a respective buyer or seller. Often they'll have a question about landmarking, and the positive or negative response will often establish the attitude on the subject for the future. And so you all really are our advocates in the field. And so I thank you for that very important work that you're doing. The work that you do is crucial to the continued success of the Landmarks program, and we're here to support and help you along the way. So thank you for all that you do. And with that, I will end my presentation and just see if we have any questions. I see one question that's come in. Will the presentation be available for download? Yes, we can make the presentation available, and also the recording of this entire symposium will be available, and that will be emailed out to participants. And I actually think that that's the only question that I see that hasn't been answered. I can definitely wait here for just a minute if anybody else has a question that they would like to put into the Q&A. And thank you all for being patient as I look for these. Is tax abatement available to individual condo owners? So this is an interesting question, and actually one that came up rather recently. The property appraiser's office has been contacted about this, and so the person that's asking this question, I encourage you to reach out to me, and I will get you additional information on that, because the property appraiser, when I spoke with them, they were looking into it and were going to get back to us with additional information. So I'm just looking here to see if there's any additional questions. I don't see any additional questions. Thank you all for the very kind comments. I see some comments coming in the chat, and so I really appreciate that. And so with that, I will say that we are actually just right on schedule. So where we're at now is that we have a break until 11:15, and then Donovan Ripkema will be giving his presentation on the recent study that he just completed. It was just finished in October, looking at landmarks and property values. And so I think that this is something that affects all of you and the work that you're doing with buying and selling properties, to look at how landmarking has really affected those property values over time. And Donovan has a wonderful, robust analysis and presentation to give you all to help you have the best information possible about how landmarking affects property values. So we're going to take just a brief break, and then I invite you all to rejoin us at 11:15. Thank you.
So Amy, I just put it up in the screen share. Can you see it all right?
Hi, Donovan. Yes, we can see you. And
Okay.
we will get started with your presentation. Well, actually, we can see your screen. We can't see you yet, but we'll get started with your presentation in about 15 minutes.
Okay, do you want me to just leave this up, or do you want it off until we get started?
I think just leave it up. I think that's good.
Yep.
Yeah,
think
okay,
that's fine. Thank you.
sure.
All right, welcome. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you all enjoyed a brief break. And now I'm really pleased to have with us here today Donovan Ripkema with PlaceEconomics for the last presentation on the property values and landmarking in Palm Beach. Donovan is the founder and principal of PlaceEconomics, and having worked in 49 states and over 50 countries studying the intersection of preservation and economics, Mr. Ripkema is widely regarded as the foremost expert on this topic. And Donovan and his team have spent hundreds of hours over this summer sorting and analyzing millions of bits of data in order to provide you with this really robust analysis and that you're about to see. So I just want to thank you all for tuning into this and turn it over to Donovan to tell you more. Take it away, Donovan.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks all of you for being here. I got a chance when Amy and I were at the Board of Realtors luncheon last week to meet some of you, so I'm glad even virtually to meet some more of you today. I got to make sure that sorry about that. As Amy said, we do a lot of work at the intersection of economics and historic preservation. She also mentioned the federal tax credit. Well, a number of states, Florida now is in the vast minority, but a number of states have state equivalent state tax credit programs. Florida ought to have one if you want to talk to your legislators. But a couple of years ago, we did a study of the Pennsylvania state tax credit. And when we were about 70% through the study, I was invited up to give a kind of sneak preview to the state preservation organization about what the findings were. And the next day, I get an email from an attendee who said this: I enjoyed your short presentation at Preservation PA the other afternoon. It was as interesting as the topic would allow. Well, I thought that's probably true. And so I actually posted that quotation on Facebook, and the next day got this from somebody else in Pennsylvania suggesting how we might, in fact, make more interesting the tax credit program. But my great colleague, Caitlin Cotton, who does all our design work, wouldn't let me do this. So we'll have to do as best we can. This might seem like the eternal economic seminar because it's mostly going to be geeky numbers, charts, and graphs. So the good thing about being in Zoom meetings, you're not visible when you doze off in the midst of it. So I want to start out before I get into the Palm Beach specific data with some kind of general patterns, lessons we've learned about this preservation economics link. In the last couple of years, we've done just finishing our 12th city level study in Phoenix, released next week. But so we've done these studies on the overall impacts of preservation in large cities, New York and Phoenix and San Antonio and Los Angeles, and smaller places like Saratoga Springs and Cumberland, Maryland, and mid-sized cities. So we're starting to get a pretty solid basis of kind of impacts. And I want to share, kind of put in national context, some of those findings. And the first of those is the issue of jobs. Again, Amy mentioned the federal tax credit. Louisiana is one of the states that has a parallel state tax credit. So we looked at what that had done. Well, over the life of that program, 820 rehabilitation projects, $2.7 billion in investment. Every year, 1,700 direct jobs and another 1,400 indirect jobs were created, and that meant paychecks of $100 million in direct labor and $63 million in indirect labor. So it's more jobs, more labor income, and more impact on other industries in rehabilitation, that is new construction. In the US, every time $100 100 jobs are created in new construction, another 135 jobs are created elsewhere in the economy. But when you have those 100 jobs in rehabilitation, it's 186 jobs elsewhere in the economy. It's this locally impact labor intensity that makes a huge difference. Again, every $100 in labor income in new construction creates $145 in labor income elsewhere, but that $100 in labor income from rehabilitation is $174. So people who are in the economic development business care about this. Then the issue of downtown revitalization. Historic properties are consistently a key role in downtown revitalization. There's a great program called Main Street. Florida has a good Main Street program. We looked at 40-year history of Main Street in North Carolina, and Main Street is economic development in the context of historic preservation, $3.5 billion of investment, most of it coming from the private sector. Well, we kind of look in other ways as well. We look in downtown Raleigh. great, vibrant, growing downtown, but of the new businesses moving into downtown, most of them moved into historic buildings, and some in older buildings that weren't designated yet. And my young colleagues always push us to look at new kind of metrics. So we looked at the top 20 restaurants on Yelp in Raleigh, and half of them, or nearly half of them, in fact, were located in historic districts. Heritage tourism, again, tourism is good and bad, has its effects, but the point about heritage tourism is that in fact it has a bigger impact per visitor than does other kind of tourism. When you go on a vacation, you basically spend all your money in 5 areas: lodging, local transportation, food and beverage, retail purchases, and recreation. And that includes things like admissions and so forth. And in every category in San Antonio, in the study there, that's where the Alamo is, so lots of heritage visitors. In not only did the heritage visitors spend more, they spent more in every category. It was Pittsburgh, not a town that you'd necessarily think of as a heritage tourism place, but even they, $600 million worth of activity in heritage, just the heritage portion of their tourism. Property values, I'm going to skip through because we're going to talk a lot about that in Palm Beach. But Savannah, one of the great historic cities in America, we looked at this in this 10-year period, 15-year period, which covered, as you'll recall, the kind of crazy upmarket, big decline, gradual recovery. And in every instance, whether they were rich neighborhoods or poor neighborhoods, the movement of values in historic districts outperformed the city as a whole. And it's not just that values are going up, that means that property revenues are going up, and just that incremental tax generated by the incremental value increase in historic districts, could give up an extra $3.5 million to the school district, $3 million to the city, and almost $3 million to the counties. It's not just the property owner who's benefiting by raising property values, but the fact wide range of public goods and services. In Saratoga Springs, another town that has some similarities to Palm Beach, in that there's wonderful inventory of historic resources and quite a bit of wealth. And we looked at the difference in values of heritage designated properties versus other by as many combinations of views as we could think of in every instance. The properties in historic districts outperformed the other comparable properties. One that's important to those of you in the real estate industry is this issue about foreclosure patterns, because we saw millions of people lose everything in the great real estate crash. We've now looked at this in, 40 cities or more. In every instance, the foreclosure rate in historic districts was decidedly less than the city as a whole. A couple of years ago, we did a study in Miami-Dade County, and here's the foreclosure results from there. And here is Pittsburgh, where the foreclosure rate was a third in local historic districts as it was in the rest of Pittsburgh. Small businesses, and many of you fall into that category. I'm kind of a believer. Well, Nashville, of course, a real vibrant city. 3% of all jobs are in historic districts, but 11% of all the job growth, and 13% of the startup jobs, and 15% of the small business jobs are in those historic districts. This is San Antonio, and the purple areas show the historic districts. The green circles are jobs at small firms employing less than 20 people. And you can see it's not that they're all in historic districts, but there is this pattern of concentrating in or near those historic districts. Small businesses want places of character, and that's what those historic districts are. Startup jobs. Los Angeles doesn't have very many commercial historic districts, but a disproportionate share of the startup jobs choose to be in what they call historic preservation overlay zones. Particularly jobs in the knowledge and creative class sectors. That might not be what you think about Indianapolis for, but they actually have a concentration of those kind of jobs disproportionately in historic districts. Here's New York City. You can love it or you can hate it, but nobody can say it's not one of the most creative cities in the world. So historic districts in Manhattan include about 12.5% of all jobs, but almost a quarter of the jobs, arts, entertainment, recreation, the kind of creative class core jobs. So it makes a difference. And then the high-tech firms in New York, the FANGs, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, all have in the last 2 or 3 years either acquired and rehabilitated or signed long-term leases in historic buildings because that's what their millennial employees, they don't want to be in some boring old building, they want to be in someplace cool. Then again, Amy mentioned this issue about environmental responsibility. Bloomberg, when he was mayor of New York, wanted to put New York on the path of being the most sustainable city in the world. And good businessman that he is, said, step one, we got to figure out where we're using our energy now. Well, lo and behold, it wouldn't have anything to do with preservation. He just said, where are we using energy? Well, what they discovered, in fact, contrary, frankly, to what environmentalists have been telling us for years, the least energy consumption was in the oldest buildings. We've stolen some methodology from an ecological economist in Rhode Island, in Maryland, that we applied then in Rhode Island to look at the savings in environmental metrics when you preserve as opposed to raise and throw away and build a new building instead. And then lots of cities are talking about density. And, for lots of things, we need density. But what historic preservation, what historic districts do is provide density at a human scale. So here's a non-dense city, Los Angeles, but the density in historic districts is almost twice that of the rest of the residentially zoned land in the city. New York City, where frankly real estate industry is saying, hey, we don't like those historic districts, they're keeping us from building gazillion-story high-rises. Well, in fact, 93% of the historic districts have a density greater than the density of the city as a whole. And when you look at the low-density areas in the city, 1% of them are in historic districts, 99% are. So if there's something keeping density from happening in New York, it ain't the historic districts. So with that is kind of national background. I wanted to look at this study we were fortunate enough to do in the place you all know so well, and that's Palm Beach. The study really has 5 components, looking at current comparative values of landmark versus landmark properties. Importantly, the second one, maybe more important, is the comparative change in value over time. Then a kind of geeky approach called hedonic pricing. We did a willingness to pay survey, and Amy quoted some of that. And then, and I know that Wayne mentioned the issue about flood zones, and simply because we had the data, we took a quick look at that as well. So we looked at, got all the Palm Beach County assessment records from 2007 to 2020, of which 2,210 single-family properties, 234 of which were landmarks. So that was the base of our study. Then we did this survey using the city's listserv, where we got a survey, 153 survey responses, really good, tight ones. And then we looked at the being outdated, but the FEMA flood maps. Some just technical notes, because I know some of you are numbers geeks like me. We use the median, not the mean value, in that when you have a neighborhood with a bunch of $3 million houses, but a $40 million house, when you use the mean, numbers get skewed. So the median is the midpoint, half of the properties above and below. We used, when we made comparisons, what the assessors called the total area. They have about 3 different kind of square footage calculations. We use the total area, so it'd be consistent across. And then it'll come up in an example too. There's always a risk statistically when you have a very small number of units, you can have a small sample error, and I'll show you where that probably showed up a bit. Anyway, Amy talked a little about this, but to make the distinction clear, we've looked at lots of cities in terms of property values. Most cities protect their historic resources through historic districts. Everybody has the landmarking authority, and so the big cathedral, maybe the city hall or the courthouse are identified as individual landmarks, but the vast 90% or more of properties that are protected are done through for historic districts. In Palm Beach, it's kind of the reverse. While you have a couple historic districts, 90% or more of the properties that are designated historic, in fact, are individual landmarks. And that then was a kind of a different methodological approach that was necessary for this study. So there's the houses, there's the inventory of houses that we looked at, 234 of them, landmark properties. And we started with this issue of the current comparative value. And we started out just straightforward. What's the median value of landmark properties, median value of those not landmark? And no surprise, it's wonderful houses that are landmark, but many of them have quite large lots and most of them are lots big houses. So it's no kind of surprise, I guess, that 3 million, the median value is 3 million more for the landmark properties than the not landmark. So of course we looked up closer and we looked at the square foot value of the total area value, and by $100 a foot. Landmark properties more valuable. And again, the assessment is reflecting of your clients, of your buyers in the marketplace. Of the value of those properties. And then we decided to look in every combination of ways that we could look at. So we looked at the difference in median value by age. So if you have a house that's between 75 and 100 years old, well, the historic property is worth, $3 million more on average. On all of those age differences. Now here, if you look at that most recent, the 25 to 49, there's not many landmarks in that category. And so I wouldn't trust those numbers and say, no, it's worth 5 times, 4 times as much because it's that small sample. But the pattern is what's really important and the pattern is consistent. We looked by water proximity. I mean, it's clearly a premium is paid to be on the ocean or on the intercoastal, or in some cases both, in every instance. The landmark property that was on the ocean or on the intercoastal was worth more than the property also on the intercoastal that wasn't. We had some great help from some of your colleagues, experts in the real estate market in Palm Beach, although being a small town, has important submarkets, and we identified 6 of those, and we looked at the spread in values in all of them. Here again is an example of kind of the small sample problem. In the South, there's just a couple landmark properties. So again, I wouldn't say, oh, landmarking is worth 6 times as much, because in the South, again, what's important is the pattern is the same of the landmark properties being more valuable. But when you break it down, when you only have a handful or less of properties, the statistically it just becomes less reliable. The assessor's office has a grading system, and I think within the town of Palm Beach there were 17 different grades that were given to properties. This is a qualitative judgment on quality materials, quality of structure, quality of construction, and we for kind of clarity purposes, and so we didn't have the small sample error, we consolidated those into 4 we called grade categories. They call them classes in every instance. Properties, landmark properties in the same grade had higher median values than those non-landmark properties. They also have a condition. Now, what's weird to us looking at it is the vast majority of properties in Palm Beach were put in average condition. Well, that's obviously a kind of local definition of average, because clearly the properties are any place else in the country would say, oh, that's superb condition. But we took their categories. And again, whether rated as average in terms of condition or higher than average, landmark properties were, in fact, more valuable. Then we looked at the issue about, well, what happens if you're not a landmark, but just close to a landmark? Does it make any difference? So we looked at all of the properties that were either in the adjacent lot or across the street from landmark properties. And what we found is that the landmark properties had a median value of that 7 million for. The adjacent properties, value of about 5 million. The rest of the properties were not adjacent to landmark properties, just pennies under 4 million. So that was the kind of current value comparisons. For many of you and for many of your clients, what really makes a difference is the change in value over time. And as Amy pointed out in her presentation, sometimes that's people's concern. Hey, if my property gets landmarked, it's going to go down in value, or it's going to be stuck at whatever. So it's important, and that's a legitimate question. It's not that it's evil to ask the question, it's a legitimate question. So here is the change in raw values over time, over that 14-year period of landmark versus landmark properties. You can see the upward movement of both of them. And then we looked on the median value per square foot. And the starting point, 2007, is just virtually the same, nickels and dimes different. And then that difference grew over time, so that in the most recent years, it's about $100 a foot, as I mentioned earlier, different. But then what we did is take that base year, 2007, and we indexed it. And indexing is just a way so you compare movement over time of units that have different raw values. So that doesn't look like the Rocky Mountains. You can see kind of what the pattern is. And so we said, all right, the value of non-landmark properties in 2007 is 100. The value of landmark properties is 100. How does it change from that over time? And what you can see, well, the recession came and properties, both landmarked and non-landmarked, took a hit. But here's what's really important, is that the decline of the landmark properties was shallower, and the recovery began 2 full years before the recovery of non-landmark properties happened. So it moved, and so that difference, it started out as zero difference when we said they were both worth 100. In fact, a decided difference 14 years later. The importance here is that the market's helping all the properties. It's helping the landmark properties more than the rest of the market. And then we wanted to directly address this issue about, does landmarking hurt property values? So we took the years 2010 to 2017. And the reason, and all of the properties that were landmarked in that period, that probably would have been 70, 80 properties. And the reason we picked those years is we wanted to take the opportunity to look 3 years back and 3 years forward from when the properties were landmarked. So that's what we did. So in whatever one of those years a property was landmarked, its value was indexed at 100, and then property by property, we went, what was the movement before, the 3 years before, what was the movement 3 years after? Well, again, the properties not only kept going up, but they went up at a steeper rate. The importance is not so much that they went up, because all properties went up in value, and part of this is just a reflection of the marketplace. The real core here is that absolutely unequivocally did not hurt property values to be landmarked. They continued that upward movement. All properties did, landmark properties did at a greater rate. Then we have this kind of geeky approach called hedonic pricing. And hedonic pricing is, so you write a check to buy a property for $1 million, but what did that purchase price represent? Well, some of it was for the lot, some of it was for the view, some of it was the size of the house, whatever. So hedonic pricing is a statistical way to step back and say, all right, what were the components? How much of that $1 million went for the lot? How much went for the swimming pool, whatever? And so we did that, and the variables we used were the land size, the assessor's total area number, the proximity to the water, the condition, the grade, and the landmark status. And the vast majority of the differences in value between property A or property B can be attributable to those 6 variables. Now, the magic of hedonic pricing is that if there is a variable that has a negative impact on value, let's pretend there was a sewage disposal plant in the middle of Palm Beach, and we used that as a variable that might have a negative, and that would show up in hedonic pricing. So that's what we went to. And here is the geeky chart that comes up. And here's what that means, is that the diagonal line is based on those 6 variables. Here is the predicted price of properties. And then the various dots are all 2,100 properties. If there were no correlation, you see those dots spread all over the square. Well, they're not. They're very, very tightly grouped along that predicted line, meaning a high degree of correlation. Now, maybe there's one of you in the whole group that knows or cares what this means. The R-squared correlation was 0.92, 1.0 would be a perfect correlation. So huge, huge positive correlation coefficient. And based on that analysis, the properties, landmark properties are in fact selling for a premium, valued at a premium by the marketplace of something between 6 and 13%. And then we did this willingness to pay analysis and a survey accompanied. We used, as I said, the city's listserv to send out the survey. Uh, and, and one of the questions was, how important are the following to you personally when you think about Palm Beach? One of those responses was historic character. Well, 2/3 said it was very important, and another 27% said it was somewhat important. So over 90% of the people saying historic character of Palm Beach is important. I don't think you could ask everybody in Palm Beach if the sun goes in the east and have them agree by 90% margin that it did. And yet over 90% said that's important to me. And then we asked kind of the reverse question and giving us a series of choices. And I'll give you the rest of the choices in a second. But what kind of a negative impact do you think any of these following would have on the quality of Palm Beach? One of which was loss of historic character. And again, 70% said that would have a major negative impact, and another quarter said a moderate negative impact. So once again, over 90%. Now, 90% of people do not live in heritage properties, at least not designated properties, and yet they're seeing that as important in the quality of Palm Beach. Now, the problem with those first two questions was that I say to you, historic character, and you have to figure out in your head, well, what exactly does that mean? What is historic character? And so everybody kind of has to self-define in their minds what that means. So although this study was on residential properties, we looked at Worth Avenue and asked a question about Worth Avenue and the vias, the importance of various things as an asset to them, knowing one, everybody's going to know what Worth Avenue was, and second, people would pretty intuitively understand, yeah, that's a place with historic character. So here, the very important numbers even got higher, 80%, saying that historic character of Worth Avenue, the Vias, was very important. Now, here was the whole list of choices. How important to you personally for Palm Beach? When you're thinking about Palm Beach, not surprisingly, almost everybody said public safety. Good answer. Then a thing that's really intermingled with historic character, and that is architectural quality, also seen as very important. Then the weather, people like the weather in Palm Beach. I don't know why, I guess you do. And the next on the list was historic character. So it is important personally, not just in the absolute, but in the relative of the choices of alternatives. By the way, the full report will be available in the next few days. We'll have all the details on all this, so you can look at them, cite them, ask questions about them, whatever you want. Then the question about negative impact. Well, again, diminished public safety, biggest negative impact, increased traffic, and then kind of neck and neck with sea level and climate change and diminution of historic character. So people are seeing it even when they're given a variety of choices. And in the assets of Worth Avenue, highest walkability, and then quality of merchandise, and then the historic character, more important than those other characteristics of that great shopping area. And then this part of this survey was the question, how much would you be willing to give as a voluntary one-time contribution to maintain the historic character of Palm Beach? No specificity, not saying give to this building or this park or something, no specificity, just to the character itself. So people had to self-define. And importantly, people in Palm Beach, as you know better than I, they're as philanthropists with a lot of money who are used to being asked. So they're kind of particular about what they say yes to. Well, 70% were willing to give something. And when we totaled that, weighted those responses and totaled that up, that value of maintaining the historic character, $60 million. And again, that's over and above the value of those historic properties as a piece of real estate. Now, you could say, well, $60 million, some of the individual properties are worth $60 million. That's right, they are. But still, that doesn't mean it's an insignificant number. It's $12,000 to $1,000 per household, $7,000 per person. Even if you talk about the people there just seasonally, it's $2,400 per person. It's, if you take the total amount people are willing to give in some divided by the number of landmarks, it's $170,000 per landmark. And in fact, people would be willing to give as a one-time voluntary contribution more than the town of Palm Beach gets in property tax revenues every year. And then finally, and Wayne talked about the properties in the flood zone, really wasn't a core part of the study, but since we assembled all the data, we thought we'd just throw it in. So we looked at properties, single family properties in the 100-year flood zone. And again, as Wayne said, FEMA is in transition to the measurement. So take these for what they were, but 116 landmark properties in the flood zone, about half of them, 1,100 non-landmark properties, about 57% of them in the 100-year flood zone. In terms of value, and ordinarily we didn't divide up land and building values, but here, while land can suffer from climate change efforts, erosion, so forth, it's mostly the building. So here is the dollar amounts of property at risk in landmark properties. So $800 million worth of landmark properties, in fact, in that flood zone. And then over $6 billion of non-landmark properties in the 100-year flood zone. Total overall, $7.5 billion of properties there. So new map or old maps, it's something to seriously consider about the future of the value of the assets you deal with every day. They're in those flood zones. So I want to finish with a quotation from one of the great American economists, John Kenneth Galbraith. The preservation movement has one great curiosity. There is never retrospective controversy or regret. Preservationists are the only people in the world who are invariably confirmed in their wisdom after the fact. So thanks very much. Thanks Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach for letting us do the study, and I'm happy to take whatever questions there might be. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Donovan, for that wonderful presentation. I'm just looking here. I've been monitoring the Q&A throughout, and I don't see any questions that have posted so far, but we might still have those roll in for just a minute. I do see some very nice comments saying thank you so much for presenting and also for speaking to many people at the Palm Beach Board of Realtors luncheon. So thank you for those nice comments.
We enjoyed it, and there was great dessert there, so that was the bonus.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll just go ahead and give people another minute if they have any questions that they would like to post. And as Donovan mentioned, I do want to say that we are happy to send out an electronic copy of the 4-page summary report and also of the full report once we receive it. It's so hot off the presses that it's not quite off the presses yet. And we also have some printed copies and can get those out to your real estate offices. So we would encourage you to share those with all of your agents and with your property owners, the buyers and sellers. Please share those 4-page summaries. We have actually, had them printed just like this in a nice format so that people can open it up and learn a little bit more about the study. And so we will be working to get those to you all. And if there's anybody in particular that would like to reach out and let me know, I'd be happy to get copies of that summary report to your office. So thank you again. I'm still monitoring here in the chat and in the Q&A, and I don't see any more questions that have come in for Donovan. And so I think with that, if anybody has questions, you're still welcome to put them in here, but I'll just give some wrap-up comments. I just want to thank again this morning all of the presenters from the town of Palm Beach, Sarah Pardue, Jordan Hodges, James Murphy, and Wayne Bergman, and also to Janet Murphy and Emily Stillings from Murphy Stillings for being with us this morning. I want to thank Donovan Ripkema for his wonderful study that he's done for the foundation and for being here with us to share it with all of you this morning. Has so much wonderful information that I hope will greatly help the work that you all do. And I want to especially thank the Palm Beach Board of Realtors for partnering with us on this symposium. We so appreciate that, and we thank you all for attending, and we look forward to working with you in the future and to assisting you on any projects that you have, and we hope that we'll see you at another foundation event. And so with that, if I don't see any other questions coming in, you all will get a follow-up email, and there will be a link to the recording for this session. You're welcome to contact us with any additional questions, or if you'd like a copy of the presentation. And unless anybody has anything else, I'll just say thank you again. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you again at another foundation event. Take care.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye.